What could be the role of education for sustainable development in terms of economy, environment and politics?
Well, that's a very good and important question. I was part of a team led by Professor Mike Spence, the Growth Commission team, that worked for 3 years to identify the main sources of sustainable growth and development in different countries since the 1940s. What explains the rise of countries like China, Korea, Brazil, Singapore, Malaysia? What was very much common among them is basically the investment in human capital. Granted, there was some serious attention to many other things like macroeconomic stability, political stability, the outward orientation of their policies, the forward-looking approach in their policies by having emphasis on savings and investments. But what was very much common among all of these countries that managed to have sustainable growth and development for more than 25 years is basically their investment in human capital, education, health, and social protection. But they had very good emphasis on education. So it is not a theory of education. This had been tested. And actually, it's not just this group of countries. When you see what we consider today as the advanced countries, you can really consider the kind of investment that they had during the 19th century and the 18th century, and of course during the 20th century, in the quality of education. Through these kind of investments, you maintain high caliber in the society, you maintain high quality of human development, and this results in whatever you see of positive outcomes.
25 years, isn't it a long term for the planning?
Yeah, well, the study was about the performance of these countries in 25 years. In order to test this kind of argument, what was behind the success and development of countries, you cannot just rely on a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, to make some sort of judgment or evidence. You need to make sure that some factors have been there without any kind of interruption that were responsible for growth. But if you mean, does it require another 25 years for the countries that are about to start their reforms? Well, there is some progress in the catching up game. These countries that I mentioned, like China and Singapore and Korea and Taiwan and Hong Kong, during the years they managed to do these developments in a faster pace compared to, say, Germany or the UK or the United States of America, that took them more years. What these countries managed to do is basically to benefit from the advantage of starting late, to adopt the policies and ideas and paradigms more or less after adapting them to their cultures and their needs. But what was there in these advanced countries today, what is there in these emerging countries, and what would be the case in more countries to come in the future, is basically taking the issue of education seriously.
Do you think there is a big difference between the continents as well?
Well, there had been a great deal of discrepancy of the quality of education, on the performance. And now if you take the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, as a reference, you can see that there are some countries which managed to achieve the goals of education and equity in education and parity in education by giving a chance as well to the young girls and women to have access to education. So it's not just a difference between continents, there have been difference between countries. And within the countries, you can see as well some differences among the regions. And the aim of the World Bank as a partner of development is to have this basic need education being covered in a good way without discrepancy.
Okay, economic shocks are destabilizing countries. What does that mean for the education?
Right, there are two sides about that. When you have an economic shock to the economic system, the impact of that on the budget is negative and bad. Some countries would consider the education sector as a soft target. So they would say, well, let's spend more on other areas to deal with the crisis at the expense and with sacrificing the spending on education. Fortunately, the latest report available on education for all had shown that globally the percentage of spending on education didn't decline. It kept momentum. Although that those who are passionate and keen to have the education to take adequate priority are not satisfied about the levels of education, but at least we see that there was no sacrifice. This is on average from a global perspective. But there had been some regions that didn't do well, and we have seen a decline of public spending on education. But if you are focusing on sub-Saharan African countries, the good news coming from sub-Saharan African countries that there had been an increase by more than 4% a year to a year kind of a change over time. So this is good in a way. And if you are comparing what the countries on average are spending recently compared to what they were spending in real terms in the 1990s, there had been some sort of improvement of the spending on education. But again, if you take it from another perspective about what we needed more from the education, and especially if we're going to be focusing on the quality of education, there is still a room for improvement.
So you see an advantage in the sub-Saharan countries a little bit, a chance for them in the future time?
Well, it's a good indicator that they are taking education seriously, but we shouldn't really be forgetting that they are coming from a relatively weak background and very low initial conditions. But having this kind of priority in the investment in human capital and the kind of enthusiasm and competition that we are seeing by enhancing their capacities, improving their institutions, improving the enrollment ratios, and having good access to girls, I think it's a good start. And if we link that as well with other development goals like investment in health, if we link that as well with the employability of the graduates of the educational systems and institutions, this will sustain the efforts that we have seen during the last 10 years or so.
Could it be true that the women can be the key of the success of the development in education in the future?
We have seen many studies based on empirical evidence and surveys that the investment in the education of girls and women had this kind of positive multiplier effect as a supporter to the household, as a potential mother and an active partner in the society. So we see high returns of educating women. Unfortunately, part of the good returns are missing. While we have been seeing some good indicators of access to education and improvement in the enrollment of girls in schools, we're not seeing the same as far as the job markets are concerned. And typically in many developing countries, you see that the unemployment rate among women could be double, and in some cases 3 or 4 times higher than the national unemployment rate.
Thank you. is there a chance that education could contribute to establish a kind of global ethics for business and economy?
Well, if you are going to consider education beyond what's there on the conventional ways of teaching and the curriculums in schools, but basically with an approach for learning for life, which is being adopted by the World Bank Group in cooperation with the specialized bodies in education and culture, the warranted impact that you mentioned could be very much achieved. Is basically to empower the young generation and the children to be able to be positive partners and members of the society, with openness, with capacity to accommodate differences, and this is basically the kind of values and cultures that we need to promote. Here it takes you from the quantitative measures of education to the qualitative measures of education, including the capacity to learn.